Fáilte. Welcome to the Village Oak Tree. I'm your host, Terrance Ó Domhnaill. Thank you for joining me again this week. It came to my attention last week that ranting about all the government corruption taking place every week in the United States is probably going on deaf ears these days. So I decided to chase after things that are more important to regular people like you and me, such as climate change that's wreaking hell on people around the world, especially this winter. So gather around, sit you down somewhere comfortable for a bit, and let's talk about the extreme weather happening everywhere around the planet for a bit, and a couple of other things I discovered in overseas media. How many of you in the US are aware of the huge floods in Western Europe that have taken place since last fall? Some of you may have heard of the deadly floods in Valencia, Spain, but what about France and Germany? They didn't make much of a splash in the US news because Trump and his attempt at becoming an autocratic leader has pretty much sucked up all the oxygen in the US news, both in the legacy corporate media and the independents. My wife, who is one of the few fans I still have, mentioned to me last Saturday morning that I talk too fast to these podcasts, that this made my monologues hard to understand at times. So I'm going to try and slow down some and make this like a conversation with the world at large, rather than an angry rant about government corruption and justice for the people. Not that that's a bad thing, but I'm shouting into the wind along with everyone else. This week, I want to pay a little more attention to the weather because that affects everyone, no matter how much money you have. Obviously, it affects some people more than others, depending on your income status, but still, when it rains, anyone who steps outside in it gets wet, no matter who you are. All around the world right now, the planet is undergoing a massive shift in the climate, due in large part to all the greenhouse gases being pumped into the air all over the world. As a result, the average mean ambient temperatures are rising and will likely move past the 1.5 C threshold within the next few years. Something that the climate scientists once told us wouldn't happen for a couple of decades or more. I guess they were wrong, or the humans on this planet shrugged and said, who cares? Nothing matters to us other than surviving comfortably. We'll worry about the future if we survive that long. Tell that to the thousands of people affected by the monsoon floods every year now in Southwest Asia, China, Southeast Asia, North America, and so on. Although in Europe and North America, they don't call them monsoon floods. In North America, they're called supercells. No matter what you call them, they dump a lot of rain in a short amount of time and cause severe flooding. Just as ask those folks in the hill country of Central Texas. Then in the warmer months, there are the ever-increasing wildfires destroying huge tracts of forest all over the planet. It's not just in North America anymore. These floods and wildfires are hitting every continent on the planet now. Then there are the droughts happening in places that haven't experienced them in decades, which is exacerbating the wildfire danger everywhere as well. Australia has been hit hard lately with huge typhoons and massive tropical storms, plus wildfires from rising global temperatures. North America, especially the western United States and Canada, have been hit especially hard in the last few years, although Atlantic Canada has been spared either. These wildfires are happening everywhere on the planet that have forests these days, from Europe to Russia, South America to Africa in the last couple of years. The flooding is also increasing in Western Europe due to massive storms or stalling fronts that drop huge amounts of rainfall in places that are not equipped to deal with all that water at once. I found several news stories to bolster my point here. The ecosystems that we took for granted for generations are changing, and not for the good. There are countries around the world that are trying to stop some of the flooding from wiping out towns and destroying people's homes, but that's the other side of the coin. With certain governments calling climate change a hoax, the funding is nowhere near what's needed, or the enthusiasm is lacking to build what's needed. As the nations of the world adopt more of a nationalistic posture in recent years, they're also stepping back from dealing with climate change. Not all, but more and more these days. The one large exception might be China. They seem to be the one superpower that's trying to even things out a little bit. It's now an official statistic. China is the world's leading manufacturer. But with that distinction comes the dark side. They're also right up there, up near the top for pollution. And they don't have as many laws about that compared to the West. But that's changing in the West, and not in a good way. China is working hard on supplanting fossil fuel usage with renewable energy sources like nuclear, wind, and solar. They're using a lot of available land to set all that up. It's not that they're doing this because they want to save the planet necessarily, although there is a little bit of that in their reasoning. They're doing it so they don't have to be so dependent on fossil fuels to power all their industrial might. Where do the fossil fuel imports come from primarily? Not China. And that's a vulnerability for them strategically. China has always thought of things in the long game. They do things by looking years down the road of what might be, whereas the West likes to think in the short term for the most part. So it only makes sense to replace fossil fuels with renewables, prevent the West from choking out the fossil fuels that they need to drive their industries for now, which is why they're helping to defend Iran from US and Israel. It's all about the oil until someday years from now, when they can declare to the world, quote, "We don't need your stinking oil anymore," unquote. As far as the climate is concerned, offsetting all the greenhouse gases from their factories is a win for them. They can mitigate a large portion of those gases around the continent. Maybe the huge typhoons flooding parts of the country won't happen so much. They may also be trying to slow down the sands blowing in from the Gobi Desert that have been creating an absolute respiratory nightmare for some of the western provinces and cities. In Europe and US, some of the governments have decided that supporting climate change mitigations are no longer popular. So they're trying to cut back funding for renewable energy initiatives. In the case of the US, Trump took a large bribe from the fossil fuel industrialists, so he's gutted the EPA and pulled funding for all of federal renewable energy projects. Now, not all of the core EU nations are spending their money on new defense projects. Not all, but the core EU nations are spending their money on the new defense projects out of fear of the Russians. That and the public statements by the current regime in the US showing that they're probably not going to support the EU nations without any major insurance payments to the top mafia don. When I say Europe, I'm including Canada in this group. They're all struggling with trying to diversify their trading partners as quickly as possible because of the Trump tariffs. They're also ramping up their defense spending for the same reason. The U.S. security umbrella appears to have a lot of holes in it, courtesy of the mafia don. There's not a lot of Canadian news about whether the Canadians have slowed down any of their support for renewable energy, so that may be good news. I would like to hope that no news is good news for them. That's the reason we aren't hearing anything. The reason we aren't hearing anything may mean that everything in Canada is following the status quo. I hope so. In the US, as spring is starting to show in some of the warmer latitudes, there are more stories coming out that the Trump government is basically shutting down all federal disaster relief departments. Timing couldn't be worse. As the snow melts and the spring storms arrive, as they do every year, as most people know in the U.S., tornado season will be upon us within a couple of months. So if there's no more FEMA or other disaster relief help available, there may be a lot more deaths and homeless people if they lose their homes in a natural disaster. We all know that the private homeowners insurance companies are doing all they can to avoid payouts these days. If the government bails, they may view this as an excuse to also bail on their customers. I shudder to think about what the refugee crisis could become if the federal government decides not to take care of its people. There are still a lot of people waiting for help more than a year later after the wildfires in California and Hurricane Helene. In a related news article, it seems that there may be another reason why Trump is gutting the federal government. In this article I found, Trump has made only a token payment to the United Nations out of the billions of back dues to be a member of that vaunted organization that is over 80 years old now. Yet he took $10 billion from the taxpayers to pay his initial dues to the new Board of Peace. The U.S. owes $4 billion to the UN. So why didn't he use $4 billion out of that 10 to pay the dues to bring the U.S. up to paid status? Goes back to what I said last week. Trump was probably laying the groundwork to lead the UN and put everything into the new Board of Peace, where he is the new organization's equivalent of the Secretary General, with no one else having any veto power. In other words, no Security Council will tell him no, and he apparently has sole control over all that money. As far as the money goes, if he can continue to grift the House of Representatives at every corner, why not? Shut down as many federal expenditures as he can get away with and divert that money over to his personal interests. It's what he's been doing for decades. Why would he stop now? Conning the U.S. government out of billions of taxpayer money would have to be the ultimate con in the history books. And he thinks he's immune from prosecution for anything he does. I guarantee if Congress figures out what he's doing, and even a lot of Republicans won't stand for it. And he can be impeached and indicted for theft of government money for personal gain, because that's not part of his job description as president. My last article this week, I bring you another story from Europe. How many people remember back to 2022 when the Nord Stream pipeline running underneath the Baltic Sea off the coast of Denmark was bombed by terrorists associated to the Ukrainian war? At the time, it was blamed on the Russians, but that didn't hold water as there was no motive, no evidence. Why would the Russians cut off a huge revenue stream like that? It was blamed on unknown terrorists until an obscure news story from Denmark surfaced in 2024 that I reported on here about how a Danish harbor master reported to a Danish newspaper, Politiken, that he had seen U.S. warships operating without transponders close to where the section of the pipeline was destroyed, and was told to forget everything, forget he saw anything. Everyone in the West dismissed it as nothing. The Americans denied everything, and so it went until last year, when they discovered that a small group of Ukrainian Special Forces divers had supposedly done the deed. The Germans chased them into Ukraine and Poland, and they're still arguing over who gets to hold the one they caught accountable. In this article from Russian media, they now say that they have proof that the American CIA was involved, which doesn't surprise me. So think about this for a minute. Who was the American president in 2022? Genocide Joe Biden, the butcher of Gaza and Ukraine. Most people my age know all about how murderous the U.S. CIA has been since the end of World War II. They were called the OSS back then, reconstituted by President Truman in January 1946 as the CIA, and made official by Congress in September of 1947. The unofficial main purpose of the CIA since then was at first to go after the communists in Eastern Europe and Russia. Then after the USSR fell, they switched gears and started going after terrorists in South America and the Middle East. We can see the disasters they have created all over the world since. So does it stand to wonder that the CIA was probably involved with supporting Ukrainian special ops and blowing up the underwater gas pipe running from Russia to Germany? Was the U.S. involved? The story makes that very plausible. The USS Kearsarge probably was the platform that the divers used for transportation to get them close to the spot on the pipeline that they had mapped out beforehand. The Wasp class are amphibious transport ships with a large rear deck that small boats can be launched from. Look it up on Google or whatever. Of course, the Americans deny everything. No surprise there. But knowing how Genocide Joe behaved towards the Russians when the Russian special military operation started, and his long history of public rhetoric against the Russians during his long political career during the Cold War, what do you think? I don't think the U.S. Navy ever did anything beyond logistical support, likely at the behest of Biden at the CIA. Most likely, the Ukrainians came to NATO and the CIA with the idea and asked for the support to carry out the mission. What better way to push the EU into fully supporting the Ukrainians against the Russians than to try and convince the Germans that the Russians were coming, and the first strike against the EU was the Nord Stream pipeline? Here it is 4 years later, and Germany is in a recession. Their industries are collapsing due to the loss of all that cheap Russian oil and gas. So who's the winner here? It would seem Russia won that battle without ever getting their feet wet. So to wrap this up, how many Americans care about what happened to the Nord Stream pipeline? It doesn't have any impact on their daily lives, nor do they much care about what their CIA does anywhere in the world, as they have rarely seen any direct effects on their lives from their actions. What do the Americans really care about these days with regard to climate change and foreign policies? The answer lies in whether any of that has a direct impact on their daily lives. Little else matters. And that's why people like Donald Trump keep getting away with all the crimes they do. The same could be said for nearly all the other U.S. presidents within the last 80 years. Their crimes against humanity scream for justice from the millions of dead they're responsible for. It's time for my break. Please stick around for the next episode of The Priest after I return. During this break, I want to take a couple of minutes to explain how you can support this podcast, mainly through my website at ranting.com. First, let me say, I don't initially paywall my Substack podcasts and articles for the first 30 days, but I do accept donations of any amount in most currencies using the donation page on my website, which viewers can visit using the QR code at the top left of me here. The website is also listed at the bottom of this video. If you're listening to an audio version of the podcast episode, use the link in the podcast description. And once you get past the intro page, and let me scroll over here and walk you through, you get to the home page, a little information about me, and a Google Translator here at the top of the page. And on the menu bar at the top, there's a blog section. I write articles about anything I'm thinking about at any given time. You can find them here. I try to publish on social media. I do this here because I don't want to have to worry about censorship from the tech companies. There's a photography section, which I have here, which shows pictures from all over the world from my days of traveling everywhere. I've got current photos of all my misadventures from my younger days. Then there's an online store where you can purchase my books, my son's books. There's arrows. You can scroll through the different things that we'll have for sale here. You can get an idea what this looks like. And then there's another pages at the top. This is where you can go and you can see previous podcasts. There's a little bit of bio. And then here's my donations page. Now, if there's any questions, I have set up several methods for visitors to reach out to me directly. You can go here to the contact page. And there's also, if you've got a technical question, you can use this little icon here at the bottom right. There's social media links, you name it. You can find me any way you want. So I hope people watching or listening to the podcast or reading the commentary will take a moment and come visit me at ranting.com. You might even have something you like and you'll want to come back for more. Sláinte. Welcome back. So let me pull up Michael's story here, the latest chapter. And we'll go full screen like we always do. And I will go over here and we'll read this to you. The Priest, formerly known as Bob, Part 63 by Michael Campy. The Priest. The loss of everything once considered civilized creeps up on you slowly in the apocalypse. All the traits that characterized us and what we took such pride in, compassion, concern for others, our desires to be useful just fade away. It's like watching clouds that are moving so slowly that they appear to be standing still. You watch for a long time and then realize that they have changed and you don't even notice it. There were people in the old world who were incapable of dealing with that loss, and they withered up and eventually died. The horror of facing the idea of becoming something entirely different with no available reference points was too much for them to bear. I felt a sense of relief and almost happiness that I had been able to let the old world go. The full effect of that was like walking into a warm, comfortable darkness, becoming part of it rather than fearing it. Everything that I thought that defined me in the old world was gone. I was now a wholly different creature and ideally suited to the task at hand. Had over the last several months absorbed, either consciously or by osmosis, a lot of the character traits that Dolly possessed. He was a creature of the new world before the new world even began. And I was he was a creature of the he was a creature of the new world before the new world even began, and I was proud of this connection with him. It felt like being infused with a new and unfamiliar strength of being stronger and more capable than you knew. And I knew that Kurtz was a dead man for killing Dolly. I wondered if Kurtz knew it. My opinion is that he doesn't. He most likely thinks that taking out Dolly will be the straw that breaks our backs. And it would have been if we were the same people we had been, but we weren't. Now I am the killer I had always, on some level, fancied myself to be. Or should I say that now I get the chance to be the killer I had always thought I was. Overconfident people almost always make the same mistake. Their opinion of themselves as superior colors their perception of the strength in others. I saw a TV show once about Navy SEALs, and in one scene, a second generation SEAL is reading a letter that his father wrote. In the letter, his father said that the worst thing about growing old is that people no longer perceive you as dangerous. I remember thinking that he was wrong. In my opinion, the best thing about growing old is that people no longer view you as dangerous because in a conflict situation, if the attacker does not see you as a threat, then you have an advantage going in. If Kurtz did indeed not view us as a threat, then we had the upper hand. I plan to make sure that he regretted that opinion right before I shoved my stick through his heart. All right, so let me pull this back off here. So I appreciate you tuning in again this week. I'm sure there's going to be more chapters like that. I'll pick them up and go. Um, he doesn't have that many chapters left in his little series here. I personally think he should make it into a book. But I'll talk to him about that. We'll see how that goes. So I appreciate everybody coming in. Garma Haggett. Thank you for watching and listening to the show today. I hope you enjoyed it and you'll return again to listen to me offer a voice to what a lot of people are thinking these days. As I say goodbye this week, I will leave you with this thought. It's up to us to decide how we want to live with each other, whether it's in cooperation to battle what's coming our way or not. Together we stand a chance. Alone, we'll die a lonely death. Slongo Foyle.